We're going to look at a short clip today on the application of Venetian plaster of a particular finish called sgraffito. And over the years, we've learned how to do a lot of different kinds of textures and finishes with using the same material. This is a material we import from Italy, and we've been using it for, I don't know, 30 years, and we seem to really love this particular material. When you first start using it and you take it out of the can, you want to make sure that you keep it sealed so that it doesn't get crusted over. Anything that is crusted or hard is going to scratch your surface, so you want to make sure that everything is a consistently smooth material. Here, the first thing that we do when we approach the wall is to roll on the first coat, which we're calling the base coat. And again, we've just sort of trial and error discovered that if you water down the material and get it to a paint consistency, then it's easier to roll on with a 1/4-inch nap roller, and it provides a kind of tooth that your next layers can grab onto. So I do want to just mention that your wall should be prepared to a level 5 finish, and ordinarily this is being prepared by others prior to our coming to a job site. We've got general painters who are preparing the wall for us. But you do want to make sure that you have nothing protruding, that you have no tape lines, that they've done a really good job, and anything you might have to sand down or knock off, you want to do that prior to rolling on. And here's just building up that little bit of toothy texture. This is the Venetian plaster in the bucket that, again, you have to keep moist. You have to keep it really damp. She's going to put a rag over it just to keep it, whatever you're not using, you want to make sure it's wet and not getting crusty, and no particles from the side of the container are falling into the container. And you're constantly cleaning off your blades. And truthfully, I probably would have had a bucket of water. I think that's an easier way to clean off keep your blades clean, is to just be dipping them into a bucket of water and cleaning them off. You just don't want that dried material to stay on your blade and fall into your bucket of Venetian plaster. And this is actually after the first coat of Venetian plaster has been already applied. And Chuck is just sanding the surface here, making sure, knocking it down, making sure there are no any particles protruding, anything that needs to get sanded down. And here's Rachel is applying that second coat of Venetian plaster. Again, making sure it's totally smooth. And corners, interior and exterior corners, are always going to be the most delicate areas to deal with, and you want to make sure they're really, really clean, and you often will have to sand them a bit. But if you're pulling that material really tight with the blade, as she is doing, you really shouldn't need to sand down the wall after she's applied that coat. It's pretty smooth. I mean, obviously, if there is anything to knock out, you can sand it with, a 250 grit or, fine sandpaper, fine grit. You don't want to scratch it. And you can see how she's dealing with the corner here, really getting off all that excess Venetian plaster. So the way that this particular finish is done is the first layers are just like you would apply any basic Venetian plaster. Nothing different about it. We're not doing anything special here. Ordinarily, though, you definitely want to mask off any adjacent areas that weren't going to receive the Venetian plaster. But in this case, we actually applied the Venetian plaster to the ceiling as well as the walls. Well, no amount of my paint is going to do that.
I understand.
Okay.
I know that corner's a big problem right there.
Well, and let me, yeah. That, all the corners.
Okay, I did see that.
And it's really good, like, I don't do it all the time because I don't need to, when you're learning to go like this into the wet, rather than going
And I think
like this.
she's talking about dragging your material into an already wet area rather than stopping and starting in dry areas. You want to start in a corner of the wall and then work your way down and across so that you're kind of still moving into, your blade is moving constantly back into the wet area that you've already started. And this isn't so important when you're doing white on white because obviously you don't really see the marks that much. But if you're doing any kind of a deep color, you really do want to keep moving wet into wet instead of going into dry areas. You'll create a lot of color variation, which you may, again, the client may want that, but ordinarily not. Ordinarily you want a fairly consistent look. Now, this is the wax coat that is necessary before we do the next steps, which is the sgraffito part of this. We're waxing the surface to seal it. And you'll see how important this is later when we apply the sgraffito. You want everything sealed because any other layers you're going to put on top of this are going to show through. It is white, and any kind of dirt or other tinted wax that we're going to put on later would stain the white. So this coat of wax is protecting everything, sealing it, and also it's going to provide that layer of high sheen that we're after. You'll notice that Rachel keeps cleaning off the excess old wax and applying fresh new wax out of the can. When you're applying the wax, you want to make sure you're not putting on a huge blob of wax. It tends to soak in, particularly with color. Again, white is very forgiving. But with color, you want to make sure that your wax is a thin application of wax, not a huge blob of it that you're leaving on, because it will soak in, stain, and make a dark spot. And also, again, moving from wet into wet. Or wet into dry, I should say. You're moving wet into dry. You're not starting in a dry spot. And she's just knocking off any excess wax that's on there. And applying the very thinnest coat she can. And I do want to say at this point, too, you can apply Venetian plaster with a trowel. They're using these Japanese blades, and you get a very nice thin layer when you do that. If you're applying it with a trowel, you can often go a little bit faster, apply more material. Here you see that great sheen that so signifies the Venetian plaster. Okay, now this is the sgraffito part of this finish, which is applying a design of our own creation. She's actually scratching into the layer of Venetian plaster through the wax and into the plaster. Scratching it, and we figured out we could do this with an empty ink pen, a ballpoint pen that has been emptied of its ink. You can also do this with a sharp instrument, but we found that the ballpoint pen actually presses the line into the wall, whereas a sharp tool tends to create a burr that on the surface that comes up and makes it harder to then fill with wax. So she's scratching she scratched the design into the surface. This is a random design, kind of like a scribble. We call it the Cy Twombly. And then she is filling those lines that she's made with black wax. Or it's actually gray wax. It's actually a color we mixed with using black Liberon wax and clear wax to make a kind of gray. And then she's covering the wall with it. And that wax, if we hadn't already put the clear coat of wax on, it would completely stain the white Venetian plaster. So now you see the importance of having sealed the wall completely with the clear wax. And that's the clear butcher's wax. And here she is just drawing, pressing in fairly hard, but also not so hard that it doesn't hinder a really fluid movement with her hand.
You can test that. You can do if you scratch, just put the black wax, see if you put enough pressure.
And then applying the black wax. And you can see even with the clear wax coating underneath, the black wax is staining some of the white. It's not really staining it, it's sitting on top. So fortunately, that can all be wiped off. She's using a 4-0 pad to pull it off. They also wipe the wall with rags, and they're cleaning off those excess black spots. There she is. It's pretty easy to do, but a little bit painstaking to just, slowly go through the wall. And you kind of have to avoid where you scratched in. You have to avoid your lines because it may pull the black wax out. And you want the black wax to stay in the line and not on the surface. And then here's your finished wall. It's got this beautifully delicate line drawing over the surface. And obviously you can do any kind of drawing with this, and we have done many different kinds of drawing. It can be something that is a tight design that has been drawn on the wall through a template or a pounce, or as loose as this Cy Twombly scribble. This is just a shot of the rest of the apartment in the Time Warner building, and we did many of the various surfaces from ceilings, bathroom walls, bedroom walls. This is all in the entry halls.